In 1457, Skanderbeg had achieved his most famous victory over the Ottoman Empire at the Battle of Albania, which was received with great enthusiasm throughout Italy. King Ferdinand of Naples was dealing with another Angevin uprising and asked for help from Skanderbeg. In order to repay Alfonso for the financial and military assistance given to him years before, Skanderbeg took up the Pope's pleas to help out Alfonso's son by sending a military expedition to Italy. However, before leaving, Skanderbeg tried to negotiate a ceasefire with the Ottoman Sultan to ensure his domain's safety. And in 1459, after Ottomans completed their conquest of Serbia, Ottoman envoys appealed for a 3-year armistice between Albania and the Ottoman Empire. The Sultan's purpose was to distance Skanderbeg from the Pope's crusade, as he believed the crusade's only hope for success was Skanderbeg. In order to give Albania a break from 15 years of continuous Ottoman invasion, Skanderbeg considered accepting the proposal, but he had to get the Pope's approval. Pius did not allow such an agreement and began to doubt Skanderbeg's loyalty. He thus sent ambassadors to the Pope, saying that he would only be willing to land in Italy if a ceasefire with the Turks were arranged, something which the Pope would soon allow. A 3-year truce was declared after Ottomans conquered Serbia, giving Skanderbeg the opportunity to land in Italy. Skanderbeg first sent his nephew, Constantine, with a contingent of around 500 light cavalry. Upon arriving at the town of Barletta, they were immediately detached into Ferdinand's forces to combat his Angevin rivals. By this time, Ferdinand had lost most of his territory, and was left with some fortresses in Apulia and the area surrounding Naples. The Albanians were encouraged by Ferdinand to fight in their traditional manners, and to raid the territory. Ferdinand then informed Francisco Sforza that the Albanians had been devastating Apulia, and taking whatever loot they could. These events worried the Angevins and prompted Giovanni Orsini to try to stop Skanderbeg from pouring his men into Italy. René d'Anjou had been particularly surprised by Skanderbeg's actions, since he believed that he had never offended the Albanians. Additionally, Ferdinand's main rival, Giovanni Antonio Orsini, tried to dissuade Skanderbeg from this war, and even offered him an alliance. This, however, did not affect Skanderbeg, who would then send a letter to the Prince of Taranto, stating that, "Moreover, you scorn our people, claiming the Albanians as nothing more than sheep, and according to your customs, think of us with only insults. It would seem you know nothing of the origins of our race. Our elders were the Epirotes, from whence Pyrrhus himself came forth, the might of whom the Romans could barely withstand. From those men descend these who you call sheep, but the nature of things is not changed. Why do your men run away in the faces of sheep?" The fighting continued for 3 months, after which Constantine and Ferdinand were able to regain some lost territory. Piccinino, along with Giovanni Orsini's men, retaliated by laying siege to the main castles. While Ferdinand abandoned the city and fled back to Apulia, he met Skanderbeg's ambassador, George Stres-Balshaw, who informed him that Skanderbeg was ready to land in Italy as soon as the proper galleys were provided. Before leaving for Italy, Skanderbeg needed to accumulate the appropriate equipment. Due to issues of finance and the lack of large ships, Skanderbeg's arrival was delayed, while Ferdinand was under siege in Barletta. After several papal and Neapolitan ships had arrived near Durazzo, Skanderbeg sent one of his commanders, Ivan Stres-Balshaw, with a contingent of around 500 cavalry and 1,000 infantry to the besieged Ferdinand, whereas Skanderbeg himself went to Ragusa to convince its rectors there to give him his needed funds. Ivan's men landed in Barletta on the 24th of August, 1461. The Angevin forces, among whom was Giovanni Orsini, had besieged the castle of Barletta with around 7,000 men. For 12 days, the Angevins rained hell upon Barletta, as the new standardized Angevin artillery's target was to bombard the wall's battlements and breach the city's walls. However, the walls of the city held on under heavy Angevin cannon fire. Giovanni Orsini then ordered his main infantry to assault the walls, as a long and bitter battle for possession of the walls followed. However, the determined defenders of the city proved steadfast in their battlements, as they repulsed wave after wave of the Angevin attacks on the walls. Shortly after, the Albanian banners of the League of Lesher were visibly from far off the distance. Believing that Skanderbeg himself was the leader of this force, the Angevins lifted the siege of Barletta and began withdrawing into friendly territory. Ivan then informed Ferdinand that Skanderbeg would arrive after his voyage to Ragusa. Ferdinand felt that Skanderbeg's personal involvement was essential for the war's success. Skanderbeg reached Ragusa on the 24th of August, and due to papal pressure, the Ragusans had reconsidered Skanderbeg's requests and granted the financial sum. His men were also supplied with food for their upcoming campaign. Upon landing in Italy, Ferdinand put him in command of the fortress of Barletta, whereas the king himself went to Ariano Irpino. Once left in command of the fortress, Skanderbeg moved against Ferdinand's rivals. Among them were Giovanni Orsini, John d'Anjou, Piccinino, and Francesco del Balzo. They had stationed themselves in Andria, where the Albanian assaults continued. The Albanian cavalry's light armament, swift horses, and loose ranks allowed them to quickly overcome the heavily armed Italian cavalry, which fought in tight formations. Skanderbeg then marched to Taranto. Again, Orsini tried to dissuade Skanderbeg from marching against him, but Ferdinand was wary of Orsini's faithfulness, so Skanderbeg continued raiding Orsini's territory. Skanderbeg's next task was to recapture Trani, the second most important point in Apulia. Skanderbeg succeeded in capturing the commander of the garrison, Fuscia de Foxa, who had rebelled against Ferdinand the year prior. On the morning of the 28th of December, 1461, with Fuscia's pleas, Graciani, the vice-commander of the garrison, surrendered Trani to Skanderbeg. After weeks of marauding, Skanderbeg and his Aragonese allies joined Alessandro Sforza. Together, they captured all of the remaining fortresses in southern Sicily. Seeing that their fortunes were dwindling, Skanderbeg stayed in Apulia for another month until January 1462, and then returned to Albania. However, most of his troops remained in Italy, under Ivan Balshar. His reason for leaving Italy is not clear, but it is believed that at that time, Mehmed was preparing his campaign against Hungary, something which could be turned against Albania. The war over the crown of Naples continued for several more months after Skanderbeg left. In late July of 1462, the Aragonese army captured the small fortress town of Acadia, after a 19-day siege. Acadia fell on the 9th of August of 1462, denying the rebels an important outpost, and boosting the morale of Ferdinand's troops. John of Anjou's field army, led by Condottiero Jacopo Piccinino, attempted to relieve Acadia from the besiegers, but had failed, as they withdrew towards Troia. Ferdinand, flushed with his recent success, pursued the John of Anjou's host. Just over a week later, on the 18th of August, 1462, the two forces converged in northern Apulia, near the town of Troia. Forming up for the ensuing battle, John had deployed his 3,000 Angevin infantry on the center of the field. Meanwhile, the Italian heavily armored cavalry formed the right wing, while the Angevin cavalry deployed on the left wing. From their Advantaga slope, the Aragonese army also formed up for battle. Alessandro Sforza commanded the center with the main corps of his infantry, and the contingent from Skanderbeg's veterans, numbering up to 3,000 in total. The Albanian light cavalry mainly made up the left wing, supported by Roberto Orsini's Italian cavalry. And in the right wing, Roberto Sanseverino commanded his personal retinue of cavalry. The fight began in the morning, and lasted for about 6 hours. Ferdinand likely sought to smash the Angevin center or trigger a collapse of their flanks by weight of cavalry. The battle began with a general charge of both Aragonese wings into the ranks of the Angevins. After some bloody fighting, the Angevins began losing ground, and were slowly pushed back to their camps. Seeing the tides turn in his favor, Sforza launched his main assault on the Angevin center with the bulk of his core troops. The Angevin infantry could not withstand repeated attacks from Ferdinand's armored men-at-arms, as the Aragonese cavalry had gained the upper hand on the Angevin flanks. After intense fighting, the royalist Aragonese army gained a clear upper hand, and the Angevin Italian forces began to give way and retreat in mass. Many of the Angevins started to retreat in disorder towards the walled town of Troia, as this collapse effectively ended the battle. The Battle of Troia decisively turned the tide of the conspiracy of the barons. The Prince of Taranto made peace with Ferdinand and was followed by other barons. The victory cemented Ferdinand's rule and demonstrated the strength of the emerging Aragonese administration in Naples. For Skanderbeg's services, Ferdinand awarded Monte Sant'Angelo, where many of his men soon settled in, and would eventually form the Arbresh community, which is still present today. In our next episode, we will be looking at Skanderbeg's campaign in Macedonia, so make sure you have subscribed and pressed the bell button so that you don't miss it.